Celebrities may seem to live in the lap of luxury, but sometimes they're the target of criminals. Join us as we have a look at some famous people who ended up kidnapped. Ivan Kaspersky. Kaspersky Lab had been doing well financially speaking, and its CEO was reaping the rewards. But it wasn't unheard of for the children of wealthy parents to be kidnapped, and that's exactly what would happen to Ivan Kaspersky on the fateful day that he was abducted. 5 people would end up being arrested as his captors after his abduction, and they wanted to be paid 3 million euros in ransom for the safe return of the boy to his father. Russian authorities would end up storming a home in Moscow where they found the 20-year-old safe and being held hostage. Police would discover his whereabouts after they tracked a cell phone signal, one that had called Eugene Kaspersky, the CEO of Kaspersky Lab, to make the demands for ransom money. Police were apparently surprised at the captors' stupidity because they were easily lured into a trap by the police when they were traveling to collect a down payment of the ransom. And that's when they were all stopped on the pretext of a routine document check, then being detained by the police. Eugene Kaspersky was estimated by Fortune magazine to be worth somewhere in the realm of 800 million euros, and the ringleader of the scheme wanted to use the ransom money to pay some outstanding debts. But instead, it looks like he might be spending some time reflecting on his debts in a prison cell instead. Charles Lindbergh Jr. Charles Lindbergh became an international sensation after flying the first solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. And on top of all of it, he was also a renowned aviation pilot, military officer, explorer, and author. However, it wouldn't be long until his own family would be part of the crime of the century. Lindbergh and his wife would discover their son Charles was missing from his room. And upon further inspection, they found a ransom note that demanded a full payment of $50,000 in a certain denomination, and it was riddled with spelling errors. The window was also left open, muddy footprints led from the toddler's bed to the window, and a homemade ladder were all clues that were left behind by the kidnapper. But Charles Lindbergh was desperate to get his baby back. He followed the kidnapper's instructions, dropping off the money to the location that was specified, and would then go to the area where the child was supposedly being kept. When he arrived, he discovered that there was no boat by the name of Nellie off the coast of Massachusetts, and also that his son was not waiting safely there for him. The boy's body would then be found not long after in the woods, less than a mile away from the Lindbergh mansion. And his parents, heartbroken, donated the home to charity and then moved away. The crime of the Lindbergh baby looked like it would go unsolved, but then in 1934, just 2 years after the kidnapping, a break in the case would finally occur. Lindbergh had marked the ransom money so that businesses could watch for the numbers to come up. And finally, one of the marked bills did, at a gas station. The attendant wrote down the license plate number of the vehicle because he had been suspicious of the driver the whole time. The car would then be tracked back to Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant who worked as a carpenter. During the trial of the century, Hauptmann had proclaimed his innocence right up until the very end. And an ending it would be because he was sentenced to death by electrocution. The trial had found him guilty and the evidence was piled against him. Hauptmann had been missing from work the day of the kidnapping, and then 2 days later when the ransom money had been paid, he quit his job. A sketch of the homemade ladder that was used to get inside of the toddler's room was torn from his work notebook, and the ransom money would then be found inside of his house. Shin Sangok and Choi. A little-known fact about North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il was that he loved movies, and he loved them almost as much as his son Kim Jong-un loves cheese. He would do anything to make his country have better films. Kim Jong-il became tired of the lack of creativity when it came to North Korean films, so he would devise a plan. That's when he decided to kidnap 2 South Koreans, director Shin Sangok and his wife, actress Eunhee, in 1978, all in order to try and fix the country's film industry. The dictator said that many of the North Korean films were dogmatic and always had the same set of ideological values, so he had hoped that his hostages could force films to become better. But it was a stark contrast from the state's propaganda and agenda at the time. The film seemed to paint North Korea as a perfect socialist utopia, which was far from the truth. He wanted the director and the actress to show North Korea what a true creative film would look like, and ended up holding the two hostage for 8 years before they finally were able to escape. In that time, they had earned the dictator's trust and plotted an escape during a trip to Austria while promoting North Korean films in 1986. The two had become friendly with the dictator, even appearing to enjoy each other's company, but it was mostly in the public eye because behind the scenes, Shin had been sending recorded tapes of Kim Jong-il to the United States Intelligence Agency, elaborating that he and his wife were being held hostage, and also forced to create films for North Korea. They finally managed to be taken back to South Korea after making 7 successful films, but once you pledge allegiance to North Korea and communism, it's hard for you to ever be trusted again, even if you were doing it to stay on the dictator's good side. Patty Hearst. The Hearst name is synonymous with newspapers, but what happens when a business tycoon's granddaughter is taken hostage by a violent and extreme terrorism group? Patty Hearst was kidnapped in 1974 by 3 members of the SLA. Hearst, at the time, was 19 years old and enrolled in college. The SLA was formed by a study group of students who felt that they were racially targeted by the police and wanted to create an organization which would focus on targeting members who were involved in racial profiling and continuing to allow it to happen. The abduction would come during a time when the nation was uncertain because there was a war going on overseas, a gas shortage domestically, and Watergate, all of it creating a political uprise. And it was the most opportune moment to kidnap the granddaughter of one of the wealthiest newspaper magnates in the world. Hearst would be forced into a closet for a week, where she was blindfolded and repeatedly threatened if she didn't do what she was told. Her grandfather took out a $2 million loan because the group demanded that he pay $400 million. This $400 million would be used to feed the hungry people of San Francisco, and the $2 million was a way to show that he would actually do it. The SLA also wanted 2 of their members freed from prison after having killed a professor who had organized adding police to campus. However, Hearst would refuse, and so that's when they told Patty that she would either have to join the SLA or be murdered herself. She agreed to become a member, and it was then that she was raped by 2 of the high-ranking officers of the group and then forced to take part in a robbery just 2 months later. Patty Hearst holding a machine gun in surveillance footage would be plastered all over America, and it wasn't exactly the kind of image that a whole lot of people liked. However, later on, Patty would plead to the court that she had been brainwashed, and if she didn't agree to the conditions of the SLA, that there were men standing behind her during the robbery with guns pointed at her who would shoot her instead. The media speculated otherwise, believing that the whole kidnapping may have actually been staged, and that Patty Hearst was in fact not raped by the 2 men that she claimed, but was actually in a romantic relationship with them. It would be discovered a year before the kidnapping took place that Patty had visited one of the men in prison, and he later became the SLA's leader. In the end, she would be sentenced to 35 years in prison, but the truth of why she had gone from innocent college student who was engaged and studying to the human rights warrior for SLA almost overnight was never revealed. Frank Sinatra Jr. Now, when you're the son of famous crooner Frank Sinatra, it would be pretty hard to say that you've never experienced a kidnapping or even a near kidnapping. But in 1963, when Frank Sinatra Jr. was 19 years old, he got just that during a visit to Harrah's Lake Tahoe while staying in room 417. The kidnappers would demand $240,000 in ransom money, and by today's standards, that would equate to about $1.9 million. 3 men would be captured soon after the kidnapping and would be convicted, as well as sentenced to long prison terms, which they all strangely enough only had to serve small portions of. The mastermind of the operation was Barry Keenan, and he would later be found legally insane at the time of the crime and not legally responsible for his actions. A rumor then circulated that the kidnapping had all been staged as an attempt to boost Frank Sinatra Jr.'s singing career. Although, who knows how true it was. Frank Sr. had become so concerned with not having enough change for the payphone in case the kidnappers called, that for the rest of his life he carried 10 dimes in his pocket and was even buried with 10 dimes. During the abduction, Frank and the Rat Pack were filming Robin and the Seven Hoods, and the news of the kidnapping and the assassination of his close friend JFK just a few weeks prior would cause him to shut down production of the film completely. Although it was eventually completed, and thankfully his son was returned home safely and without injury. It was January of 2012 when 9-year-old Callista Cordova was living in Colorado Springs and failed to come home from school. As it turned out, she had been abducted on her way home. She tried running away, but the lone kidnapper choked her and punched her repeatedly until she stopped resisting. After being bound and gagged, she was stuffed into the abductor's car, and the man drove all night and